You're listening to This Side of the Ceiling. Join us as we open up the Bible and invite the Holy Spirit to teach us. I'm Jill.
And I'm Kelsey. As Christians, we've been told that in this world we will have trouble. But we take heart that God has given us everything we need for life and godliness on this side of the ceiling.
Welcome to This Side of the Ceiling, and you find us in the book of James again.
Yes.
And we have I think this lesson is the one that is going to stay with me.
Right.
Maybe it's because of this season in my life right now, but this is the one, you and I shared this lesson with our college girls a month or two ago, and this is the one that keeps coming back to me because we're going to talk about wisdom.
Right.
And, the God's kingdom a lot of times is called the upside down kingdom, and God's wisdom is very different from earthly wisdom.
Right.
And James is going to talk about that. In fact, he even kind of says, fill in the blank. I think we asked the girls to do this, Blank comes from wisdom. If you're going to fill in that blank, what comes from wisdom?
Yeah, and I think patience comes from wisdom. I think, wise words or good teachings come from wisdom.
Yeah. James is going to fill this in different. James is going to say humility comes from wisdom.
Right.
And sometimes in the world today, when we think of our wise people, humility is not the word that describes them.
Right.
So this, when James is going to start with the question, who is wise and understanding among you? Mm-hmm. And so let's get into today, and let's read James 3:13 through 18.
Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness.
This is an example. A lot of times in the Bible, we get a little list contrasting.
Yeah,
I'm thinking of Galatians, where we have the acts of the flesh compared with fruit of the Spirit,
And in Colossians 3, he tells them to put to death whatever belongs to their earthly nature, and then instead clothe yourselves.
And he gives lists of all that.
List.
Yeah, and so here we get a list of what earthly wisdom looks like. But before we kind of summarize that again, I just think, what messages would you say, Kelsey, are messages that we hear in our world today of maybe we would categorize as earthly wisdom?
Yeah, follow your heart.
Yeah, every Disney movie has some part in there.
I also have heard, you do you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you think about that. Don't let anybody tell you can't do something, or take what you can, or speak up for your rights.
Take time for yourself.
Yeah, and it, that is something we hear. And yet when James is listing off what earthly wisdom looks like, he says it has envy at the root and selfish ambition. It's earthly, it's unspiritual, it's demonic.
Yeah.
The part that really stood out to me is when James says, when you find envy and selfish ambition, you find disorder in every evil practice.
Yeah.
I just think, that's a lot. But I think if you think about something evil, you can trace it back.
To the root.
You trace it back to either envy or selfish ambition. Mm-hmm. And contrasting, heavenly wisdom is, first of all,
pure.
Yeah, first of all, pure, and motives are pure, and then humble and peace-loving, gentle, considerate, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruit. I think that is a whole very different list.
Yes.
But what is really the difference between those is what they're centered on. Mm-hmm. You know, James says this idea of selfish ambition twice. He lists that word that you read. And so earthly wisdom is all about me. Like you said, you do you, or that's why that selfish ambition or greed, it's about me. And
It sounds wise in the world's eyes, but it really leads down a path that's not wise.
yeah, and if you've ever gotten trapped in a time when you feel jealous or envious, after a while you don't like yourself. You know, you just feel yourself being ugly, and you're like, I don't like this. You know, and that's usually what gets me out of it. Is like, wait a minute, this is not a person I have to live with, and I have to live with myself. So, but I do think that is the contrast of heavenly wisdom is centered on Jesus, centered on God, and therefore it's pure and all those things there. I think that because now I've sat with this lesson for a while, it has, when things come up, I feel that little seed of jealousy.
Right.
And it's made me want to snuff it out because it can grow, you know. But if we can learn to recognize things like, wait a minute, I'm just jealous of this, then we can not let it grow and implant itself into these other evil practices.
Right.
I was trying to think of examples of what that looks like, and it reminded me one time when our daughter was in the 4th grade or 3rd or 4th grade, when they were doing the little presidential fitness tests.
Right.
And so all throughout the year they had been seeing how many push-ups they could do and how long they could pull up and how they got timed in a certain run. Well, at the end of the semester at the little awards banquet, they said, and now we want to give award to the students that had done well enough on each of those tests to be awarded the presidential fitness test. Well, Allie got that award, and it surprised her. And Allie's good athlete, but she's not usually the top of it. And so it really was a surprise to her, and it was fun to watch her face, just like when they said Allie Davis, and she was just so surprised, and she jumped up, and I could just see her coming back to her seat. She couldn't believe she had gotten that. Well, after the award ceremony, I went to talk to her, and something had happened, because all of a sudden she was sad, and I said, well, Allie, what's wrong? I was excited about that. And she had this little friend at the time, and she said, she stole my joy. And I said, how did she steal your joy? And this little friend of hers was very athletic.
Right.
And so when the award was announced, she couldn't help but think, well, how could Allie Davis get this and not me?
Right.
And so when Allie came back, she said, she said it. She said, how could you get that award and not me? Yeah. And that to me was an example of this idea of seeing everything through my lens. And so, even though it might have been valid, it was hard not to look and be joyful for someone else, because I have this jealousy and this ambition of I should have got that.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to see everything through our lens.
Yeah. It's the only lens we've got.
Yeah, and that's why it is very hard to live as Jesus did.
Right.
Where he saw other people. My granddaddy taught, apparently, for several years, taught a young boys class at church. And I can remember when people telling stories since my granddaddy has passed, about remembering being in those classes. And one of the things that he would say to them was, now boys, the biggest fight that you'll ever fight is with the man in the mirror. Mm-hmm. If you can win that battle, then everything else will be easier.
Right.
And, I think that's what James is saying here. So many times it's the battle with ourselves of letting that becoming jealous or envious or selfish ambition. If we can, that's a battle with us. It's not related to the people around us. Then that's true for girls too.
Yeah.
So the biggest battle you ever face is with that person in the mirror.
It's practicing humility. I've tried to teach my daughter when she was in kindergarten about humility.
Yeah.
And we were at the breakfast table, and I was talking to her. Did she know what humility is? And she didn't know. And so I was trying to explain it to her. Well, you put others before yourself. You don't think of yourself at the center. And then I said, why don't you practice that today at school? Why don't you practice humility? And she nodded. And, so we went to school, picked her up from school that day and said, hey, Kaylin, did you practice humility at school today? And she gives me this big-eyed no thing. And she wasn't in trouble for not practicing humility, so I was trying to think of something positive. And I said, well, were you kind? Were you kind today? And she said, yes, I was. And I said, how were you kind? And she said, I let Macy and McKenna play with me.
You have some work to do still.
I thought so much about humility, but humility is hard.
It is. And humility means when we have a low view of our importance.
Yeah.
And so we
Not
can.
Of ourselves.
Yeah.
How important we are.
How important we are. And we can say that. But yet, I want to be a humble person. But that when I get in a situation and someone's not treating me important, we get our feelings hurt.
Right.
So that's one of those things that we need to really check ourselves on, because we can say that, but then it's hard to be in a situation and you realize, wait a minute, everybody else got this, or it's hard to live that out. But I do think that this window into realizing this, James speaks straight about it. He said every evil comes from that thinking about yourself.
Right.
Because if you were thinking of others, you wouldn't cause the strife.
Right.
And so if we can learn to catch that early, it won't grow. Yeah. And James, I think this is a good time to look back, because he has given us so many little nuggets. We're only still in the end of the 3rd chapter. So even just in the first 3 chapters of James, he's given us so many little nuggets of wisdom.
Right.
I don't know. I think right out of the bat when he says, count it joy.
Right.
If we can just find joy in the day, every day, then that's a nugget of wisdom.
Yeah. And if we could be quick to listen, slow to
Yes.
speak, and slow to become angry.
That's right.
Yeah.
And he says every gift is from above. If we can, everything good,
Right.
anything good that you have in your life, if you can recognize that's a gift, that's from God. This was good. Thank you, God. That helps us direct that. The other thing about this wisdom, James tells us, you don't have to work on this. I'll give it to you. God will give it to you.
Ask.
Yeah. So, I think we made that point back when we were talking about counting it joy when you have trials. I mean, because you can learn from them,
Right.
but you also can just ask for it.
Right.
There's some things in life that you don't want to go on that field trip. Don't learn it the hard way. Ask for wisdom and with a pure motive.
Right.
And consider all those good qualities that James lists are so much different than what the world is selling.
Right. Yeah. And the very verse 18 says, peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. So we gotta sow the right things to get the harvest.
That's right. And I do think it's just helpful for us to realize that there's a different wisdom. A wisdom from heaven is different than the earth's wisdom. And as followers of Christ, we want to have that heavenly wisdom. And so we're going to have to check, what are we centering our lives on? Are we centering them on us? Are we centering them on Jesus? Because that's where the wisdom comes from.
Thanks for listening and journeying with us on this side of the ceiling. See you next time.